My name is Harper and I'm 39 years old. For 28 years, I poured my heart into a tech company, starting as an intern clawing my way to VP of operations. Every morning I touched my mentor's photo on my desk for luck. I secured a $100 million deal, my proudest moment set to close the day before I retired. But that final day, it unraveled everything I built. Have you ever been replaced when you least expected it? Hit like, subscribe, and let's dive into how it all fell apart. The week before my retirement felt like a victory lap. My office was a museum of my 28 years framed awards, hung crooked on the walls. A chipped coffee mug from my first promotion sat on a shelf gathering dust. I'd walk in each morning, set my bag down, and run my fingers over the faded signatures on an old team photo from 2005. It grounded me, reminded me of the late nights the deals won, the battles fought. I was ready to leave on my terms, proud of the $100 million renewable energy deal I'd spent months crafting. My team, Jocelyn, Nathan, and Miles, had been with me through it, and we were buzzing. Last Friday, we'd stayed late ordering pizza and laughing over contract drafts. Nathan crunched numbers like a machine, Jocelyn kept us organized, and Miles, the eager rookie, soaked it all in. I felt like we were unstoppable. Monday morning, though, something shifted. I was at my desk reviewing the final contract when my phone buzzed. It was Gregory, the CEO, asking me to come to his office. His voice was clipped, not the warm tone I'd known for decades. I'd worked under him since I was 22, back when he was just a manager who took a chance on me. I trusted him, even mentored his son Lucas when he interned here years ago. So I walked down the hall expecting a quick chat about the deal's logistics. His office smelled of leather and old books, but he didn't look up when I walked in, just pointed to a chair. "Harper," he said, eyes on his laptop, "my niece Sadie is joining us for the signing. She'll shadow you. Fresh eyes, you know." His words were casual, but his jaw was tight like he was holding something back. I nodded, forcing a smile. Sure, happy to help her learn the ropes. But my stomach twisted. Why now? Why her? I'd heard about Sadie fresh out of business school, all confidence and no experience. Gregory mumbled something about her being promising and waved me out. I walked back to my desk, brushing it off. He'd always been loyal. Maybe he just wanted her to see a big deal up close. Still, the air felt heavier. Jocelyn caught my eye as I sat down. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice low. She'd been my assistant for 10 years, always reading me like an open book. Yeah, I lied, just last-minute stuff. But I couldn't shake the unease. By noon, Sadie strutted in. She was all sharp heels and a tailored blazer, her perfume hitting me before her handshake did. "Harper, right?" she said, her smile too wide. "I'm excited to learn from you. This deal's a big deal, huh?" Her tone was light, but her eyes darted to my desk, lingering on my cluttered shelves like she was sizing up my space. I offered her a chair, but she stood flipping through her phone. "I've got some ideas already," she said, not looking up. "We could streamline this whole process. Make it more modern." Her words stung like she was already rewriting my work. I bit my tongue, reminding myself she was just eager. But then Jocelyn pulled me aside during lunch. I overheard Sadie on a call, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. She said she's taking over soon. Sounded serious. My chest tightened. Taking over, I'd been here 28 years, built this department from scratch. I thought of the nights I'd stayed late, the family dinners I'd missed, the way Layla's face fell when I promised next time for her school events. Was it all for nothing? I told Jocelyn. It was probably a misunderstanding, but my hands shook as I poured coffee. Back home that night, Ethan noticed I was off. "You're still at that office in your head," he said, his voice sharp. He'd been pushing me to retire early to focus on us, on Layla. "You've given them enough, Harper." I snapped back. "I'm finishing this deal. It's my legacy." He sighed, walking away, and I felt the distance between us grow. Sadie's coffee spill came the next morning. She was rifling through my notes, leaning over my desk, and knocked over her latte. It splashed across the old team photo, soaking the signatures. "Whoops," she laughed, dabbing it with a tissue like it was nothing. I grabbed a cloth, wiping it down in silence, my throat tight. That photo was my history, my proof of belonging. Her carelessness felt like a slap. I looked at her expecting an apology, but she was already back on her phone humming. The knot in my stomach grew heavier, and I wondered if I'd been wrong to trust Gregory all these years. I tried to focus on the contract revisions that afternoon, but Sadie's presence lingered like a shadow. She hovered near my desk, asking questions that felt more like probes than curiosity. "So how do you handle client pushback?" she asked, pen tapping her notepad. I explained my approach honed over decades, but she cut me off. "Interesting. I'd probably use a data-driven pitch instead. Faster, cleaner." Her tone was breezy, but it sliced through me. I glanced at Nathan, who was crunching numbers across the room. He raised an eyebrow, sensing the jab, but said nothing. I forced a nod, keeping my voice steady. "Different styles work," I said, but my fingers gripped my pen too tight. Jocelyn shot me a look. Her lips pursed like she wanted to say something but held back. I could feel the team's unease, a quiet current running through the office. By Wednesday, Sadie was everywhere. She joined our morning huddle, standing too close to my chair, chiming in with buzzwords like disruptive synergy that made Miles nod eagerly. I caught him later rephrasing one of my negotiation points to Gregory as if it was Sadie's idea. "She's got a fresh take," he said, not meeting my eyes. My throat burned. Miles was young, hungry for approval, but his shift stung. I'd spent hours coaching him, sharing tricks I'd learned the hard way. Now he was circling her orbit, not mine. Nathan stayed loyal, quietly slipping me a revised spreadsheet, but even he seemed tense, like he sensed a storm coming. At home, the weight of it all pressed harder. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cold plate of pasta. Ethan was working late, and Layla was in her room, music blaring. I knocked on her door, hoping to talk, but she barely looked up from her laptop. "College apps," she muttered, her voice flat. I tried to ask about her top choices, but she cut me off. "You're always half here, Mom. Even now." Her words hit like a punch. I'd missed her debate team finals last year, stuck in a boardroom. I apologized, but she just shrugged, turning back to her screen. I walked away, feeling like I was failing her all over again. The next morning, I found Sadie at my desk before I arrived, flipping through a binder of my meeting notes. "Just getting up to speed," she said, not even flinching when I walked in. My jaw tightened, but I kept my cool, remembering my mentor's words about staying composed. I sat down, reclaiming my space, but her perfume clung to the air, an intrusion I couldn't shake. Later, Jocelyn pulled me into the break room, her voice low. "I saw something on the shared drive," she said, glancing at the door. "An email draft from Gregory. It's not sent yet, but it's about Sadie taking your role after the deal. Like permanently." My heart sank. I'd given this company everything: my youth, my energy, my family time. Was this how it ended? I went home that night and stood in the backyard, staring at the stars. Ethan found me there, his voice softer than before. "You don't have to keep proving yourself, Harper," he said, resting a hand on my shoulder. I wanted to agree to let go, but the thought of Sadie stepping into my shoes, erasing my work, made my blood boil. I'd built that deal, that team, that legacy. I wasn't ready to let it slip away. Not yet. As I lay awake that night, the unease turned to something sharper, something that felt like the edge of a fight I didn't want, but couldn't avoid. The days blurred into a haze of tension. Sadie's presence in the office was like a low hum, constant and grating. By Thursday, she was sitting in on every client call, her notebook open, scribbling furiously while throwing out ideas that sounded like they came straight from a business school textbook. "We should pivot to a digital-first approach," she said during a strategy session, her voice bright like she'd cracked some code I'd missed. I swallowed my irritation, explaining why our client preferred face-to-face negotiations. She just smiled, tilting her head. "Sure, but data shows virtual is the future." Miles nodded like she'd invented electricity, and I felt the room tilt slightly. Jocelyn caught my eye, her jaw tight, but Nathan stayed quiet, his fingers tapping nervously on his laptop. I could tell he wanted to back me up, but the air was thick with unspoken loyalties shifting. At lunch, I'd overheard Miles in the break room laughing with Sadie about how old school my methods were. Harper's great, but she's stuck in the 90s, he said, his voice carrying through the thin walls. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. I'd spent months teaching him how to read a client's body language, how to close a deal without a spreadsheet. Now he was parroting her words, tossing my work aside like it was outdated software. I walked back to my desk, my face burning, and found Sadie there again, rearranging my files. Just organizing, she said, not looking up. I wanted to snap to tell her to leave my space alone, but I bit my lip and sat down, my hands trembling as I opened my laptop. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every sacrifice I'd made for this company. The weekends I'd worked through the birthdays, I'd missed the way Layla used to draw pictures for me to take to the office because I was never home. I'd told myself it was worth it, that I was building something lasting. But now, with Sadie circling and Gregory's email draft looming in my mind, it felt like I'd been pouring water into a sieve. I got up at 2 a.m., pacing the living room, my bare feet cold on the hardwood. Ethan found me there, his voice soft but firm. You're killing yourself over this, Harper. Let it go. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I can't. It's all I've got left. Friday morning brought a new blow. Gregory called a team meeting, and instead of asking me to present the deal's final steps, he turned to Sadie. Let's hear your take, he said, his smile wide like he was unveiling a prize. She stood all confidence and pitched a streamlined version of my negotiation plan, stripping out the personal touches I'd spent months perfecting. The room clapped and Gregory beamed. This is the future, he said, not once looking at me. My chest tightened like someone had sucked the air out of the room. Nathan glanced my way. His eyes apologetic, but Miles was grinning, already taking notes on Sadie's every word. I sat there, my hands folded, feeling like a ghost in my own life's work. Back at my desk, I found a stack of my old reports, marked up with Sadie's handwriting, red ink circling phrases she called inefficient. I stared at the pages, my vision blurring. Those reports were the backbone of our department, written during late nights when I'd been the only one willing to stay. I thought of Layla's words, how she'd called me absent, and now here I was, watching my work be dissected by someone who'd never earned it. The anger was sharp now, cutting through the fog of hurt. I wasn't just being replaced, I was being erased. And the worst part, I didn't know if I had the fight left to stop it. I left the meeting room in a daze, my heels clicking too loud on the polished floor. Back at my desk, I tried to focus, but my eyes kept drifting to the framed certificate from my first big project, now slightly tilted on the wall. It felt like a relic from someone else's life. Sadie's voice echoed down the hall, laughing with Gregory about scaling up the deal. I overheard her say my name, her tone sharp like she was dissecting a problem. Harper's thorough, sure, but we need agility now, she said. Gregory chuckled, agreeing. My stomach churned. I'd known him for 28 years, trusted him like family. Had he been planning this all along? At lunch, I sat alone in the cafeteria, pushing a salad around my plate. Jocelyn joined me, her face tight with worry. Nathan heard something she whispered, leaning close. Sadie's been asking at for access to your email archives. Said it's for continuity. My fork froze. My emails held years of client relationship strategies I'd built from scratch. Giving her access felt like handing over my soul. I murmured something about checking with IT, but my voice sounded hollow, like it belonged to someone else. Jocelyn squeezed my hand, but I barely felt it. That evening, I drove home in silence, the radio off. Layla was at a friend's and Ethan was still at work. The house felt too big, too empty. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the couch, staring at an old photo of Layla's 5th birthday. I'd missed it, stuck in a conference call that ran late. She'd cried when I got home, her little face streaked with icing. Now at 17, she barely talked to me. I'd thought my work was for her, for our future. But what if it had cost me everything that mattered? The thought twisted like a knife. The next day, I found a company handbook I'd written years ago buried in a drawer. It was dog-eared pages marked with my notes from late-night revisions. Sadie had left a post-it on it. Needs updating. Too wordy. I stared at the note, my pulse pounding in my ears. That handbook had guided our team through 3 mergers, countless crises. It was my voice, my logic, my legacy. Now it was just wordy. I shoved it back in the drawer, my hands shaking. I wanted to confront her, to demand respect, but I could hear my mentor's voice in my head urging me to stay calm, to rise above. By Friday night, the weight was crushing. I sat in my car outside the office, the parking lot dark and empty. Ethan had texted asking me to come home early for once. I couldn't. I kept replaying Gregory's smile, Sadie's red ink, Miles's betrayal. Layla's words echoed too. "You're always half here." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My whole career, my identity was slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. Worse, I wasn't sure I deserved to. Had I given too much to this place, only to be discarded like an old file? The question burned, and I didn't have an answer. Monday morning, the day before my retirement, hit like a freight train. I walked into the office, my stomach in knots, expecting to finalize the $100 million deal I'd built brick by brick. Instead, I found a memo on my desk printed on crisp company letterhead. It was from Gregory summoning the team to an urgent board meeting at 10 a.m. No details, just his signature scrawled at the bottom. I glanced at Jocelyn, who was already at her desk, her face pale. "You see this?" I asked, holding up the paper. She nodded, her eyes darting to Sadie's empty chair. "She's already in there," she whispered with Gregory. My pulse quickened. I grabbed my notebook, my hands unsteady, and headed to the boardroom, telling myself it was just a formality. The room was packed when I arrived. Executives, board members, even the client's lead negotiator, Karen, who I'd spent months winning over. Gregory stood at the head of the table. His tie perfectly knotted, his smile too wide. Sadie sat beside him, her laptop open, radiating confidence. I took a seat near the back, my usual spot by the window now occupied by Miles, who avoided my gaze. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Gregory cleared his throat and launched into a speech about the company's future. "We're at a turning point," he said, his voice booming. "This deal is our legacy, and it needs bold leadership." My heart lifted for a moment, thinking he'd call on me. I'd earned this moment. Then he dropped the bomb. "Sadie will lead the signing tomorrow," he announced, gesturing to her like she was a prodigy. "Her innovative approach is exactly what we need." The room went silent. I felt every eye dart toward me, then away. My throat closed up, my notebook slipping from my fingers onto the table. Karen, the client, frowned, glancing at me, but said nothing. Sadie stood, her smile polished, and launched into a pitch about her vision for the deal. "I'm honored to take this forward," she said, her voice dripping with certainty. "Harper's laid a foundation, but I'll bring it into the future." The word foundation landed like a slap. I'd spent months negotiating every clause, every detail. Now I was just a stepping stone. Nathan shifted beside me, his jaw tight like he wanted to speak but couldn't. Jocelyn's hand brushed mine under the table, a small anchor, but it wasn't enough. I felt like I was sinking, the room spinning. Gregory didn't look at me once, not even a nod, for 28 years of loyalty. I thought of the late nights I'd spent mentoring his son, the times I'd covered for his mistakes, the trust I'd placed in him. All for this, to be pushed aside like an old piece of furniture. Sadie kept talking, her words blurring into noise. I gripped the edge of my chair, my nails digging into the wood, trying to hold myself together. I wanted to stand, to call out the injustice, but my mentor's voice echoed in my mind, "Never let them see you break." So I stayed still, my face a mask, even as my heart splintered. The meeting ended in a haze of applause, and people filed out, their whispers buzzing like static. Karen lingered, her eyes searching mine, but I couldn't meet her gaze. I walked back to my desk, my steps mechanical, feeling like I'd left a piece of myself in that room. The weight of it all, 28 years, my sacrifices, my pride, was collapsing, and I wasn't sure I could carry it any longer. I sat at my desk, the boardroom's echo still ringing in my ears. My hands shook as I opened my laptop, trying to look busy, but the screen blurred. Sadie's voice drifted from the hallway bright and sharp as she thanked the team for their support. I heard Miles laugh, his voice loud, congratulating her like she'd single-handedly won the deal. My deal. The one I'd spent nights perfecting, missing Layla's school plays, Ethan's anniversaries. I stared at my inbox full of emails I'd written to Karen, building trust over months. Now it felt like a diary of someone else's life. Then Sadie walked in her heels, clicking, and stopped at my desk. "Harper," she said, her tone syrupy, "I just want to thank you for setting things up so well. I know it's hard to step back, but I've got this." Her smile was all teeth, like she was rehearsing for a camera. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "No offense, but your approach was a bit dated. We're going big now." My breath caught. Dated? I'd closed deals she couldn't dream of, built relationships she'd never understand. I wanted to snap back, but my tongue felt heavy, glued to the roof of my mouth. Jocelyn overheard and stepped closer, her eyes flashing, but I shook my head slightly. "Don't. Not here." Sadie didn't notice already, turning to chat with Miles, who was hanging on her every word. I felt the room shrink, the walls closing in. I stood needing air and walked to the break room, my legs unsteady. Nathan followed, his voice low. "Harper, I tried to say something in there, but Gregory shut me down." His face was tight, guilty. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat burning. He'd tried, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was. At home that night, the dam broke. Ethan was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner when I walked in and dropped my bag. "They gave it to her," I said, my voice cracking. He stopped, knife in hand, and looked at me. What I told him, everything: Sadie's takeover, Gregory's betrayal, the room full of people who didn't stand up for me. His face darkened. "Go back tomorrow and tell them they're wrong," he said, slamming the knife down. "You deserve better." I shook my head, tears spilling. "It's too late." Layla walked in, then her earbuds dangling. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. I tried to explain, but the words tumbled out, messy, raw. Her eyes narrowed. "Why didn't you fight back, Mom? You always let people walk over you." Her words cut deeper than Sadie's. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She turned and walked upstairs, her door slamming. I sank onto the couch, Ethan's hand on my shoulder, but I felt alone. My career, my family, my worth, it was all crumbling, and I was too broken to pick up the pieces. I woke up the next morning, my eyes swollen, the weight of last night still pressing on my chest. Layla's words, "You always let people walk over you," cut deeper than Sadie's smugness or Gregory's betrayal. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at the lines around my eyes, earned from years of late nights and hard-won deals. I wasn't ready to let it all end like this, erased by someone who hadn't paid the price. I pulled my mentor's old scarf from my closet, a faded blue thing she'd worn during our toughest projects. Wrapping it around my neck, I felt a spark, a quiet resolve stirring. At the office, I moved with purpose, avoiding the usual chatter. My desk was a mess of papers, but I zeroed in on the contract for the $100 million deal. I'd spent months crafting it, every clause a shield for the company. Late last night, unable to sleep, I'd remembered a detail Sadie wouldn't know, a contingency clause I'd buried in the fine print requiring my personal approval for any last-minute changes. It was a safeguard, one I'd insisted on, because I knew this client, Karen, valued trust over flash. Sadie's modern approach had glossed right over it. I opened my laptop, my fingers steady for the first time in days. Logging into the system, I flagged the clause and sent a discreet note to Karen's team, citing a potential oversight that needed review. It wasn't sabotage, not exactly. I was just ensuring the truth would surface. If Sadie couldn't handle the clause, the client would see her inexperience for themselves. I leaned back, my heart pounding, but it wasn't fear this time. It was something fiercer, like reclaiming a piece of myself. Jocelyn knocked on my doorframe, her eyes scanning the room like she sensed a shift. "You okay, Harper?" she asked, her voice cautious. I nodded, keeping my screen angled away. "Just tying up loose ends," I said, my tone calm but firm. She hesitated, then slid a USB drive across my desk. "Client contact backups," she whispered. "Just in case." I met her gaze, a silent understanding passing between us. She'd seen Sadie's overreach and she was choosing my side. I slipped the drive into my bag, my resolve hardening. Back home, I found Layla in the living room, her college applications spread across the coffee table. She looked up, her face softer than last night. "I didn't mean to snap," she said, her voice small. I want you here, Mom." My throat tightened, but I sat beside her, resting my hand on hers. "I'm trying, kiddo," I said. "I'm figuring out how to fight for what matters." She nodded, and for the first time in weeks I felt her lean into me just a little. I wasn't done yet. Not with her, not with this deal, not with myself. I spent the rest of the morning digging through the contract's digital archives, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The office hummed around me, but I was locked in tracing every email I'd sent to Karen, every note I'd taken during our late-night calls. There was a rhythm to it, like piecing together a puzzle only I understood. I found another overlooked detail, a clause about liability limits that Sadie had dismissed as minor in a team email. I flagged it too, attaching a brief professional note to the client's legal team. For clarity, I wrote, knowing it would force a review Sadie wasn't prepared for. My pulse quickened, not with anger now, but with purpose. I wasn't tearing down the deal, I was protecting it the way I always had. Nathan stopped by my desk, his usual quiet demeanor replaced with a nervous energy. "You sure about this?" he asked, glancing at my screen. He'd seen the flagged clauses in the system tagged with my initials. I met his eyes, steady. "I'm sure," I said. He nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his face, and walked away without another word. I could tell he was torn loyal to me, but scared of the fallout. I didn't blame him. This wasn't his fight. By noon, I overheard Miles in the hallway, his voice loud as he bragged to a junior staffer about Sadie's game-changing pitch. "She's going to close this deal like a rock star," he said, oblivious to me passing by. My jaw tightened, but I kept walking, my mentor's scarf brushing my collarbone. Miles's betrayal stung, but it also clarified something. I wasn't fighting for his approval or Gregory's or even Sadie's. I was fighting for the work I'd poured my soul into, for the legacy I refused to let them rewrite. At home that evening, I sat with Layla on her bedroom floor, her college brochures scattered around us. She was quieter now, her anger from last night softened into something like curiosity. "What are you going to do?" she asked, folding a pamphlet for a school in Boston. I took a breath, choosing my words. "I'm making sure they see what I've built," I said. "Not for them, for me." She looked at me, her eyes searching, and for the first time I saw a spark of pride. "Good," she said simply, and handed me a brochure to read. We sat there talking about her future, and I felt a piece of myself settle, like I was finally showing up for her. As I left her room, I paused at the door, my hand on the frame. The house was quiet. Ethan already asleep, the weight of the day still heavy but different now. I walked to my study, pulled out a small notebook I'd kept since my first year at the company, and flipped to a blank page. I wrote one line, "This is mine." Then I closed it, set it on the shelf, and stood in the silence, feeling the strength of that choice anchor me. I wasn't done yet. The morning of the deal signing arrived, and the office felt like a held breath. I walked in early, my mentor's scarf tucked in my bag, and settled at my desk, the familiar hum of the server room grounding me. My flagged clauses had gone out to the client's team last night, a quiet move that felt like planting a seed in a storm. I didn't expect chaos, just truth. By 9 a.m., Karen's assistant emailed requesting an urgent call about discrepancies in the contract. My heart skipped, but I stayed still, sipping coffee, watching the clock. Sadie arrived all polish and poised her laptop under one arm. She didn't glance my way, bustling into the conference room with Gregory. I overheard her rehearsing her pitch, her voice loud, confident, unaware of the email. Then my phone buzzed. Karen herself, not her assistant. "Harper," she said, her tone sharp but curious. "Your notes caught something critical. Can you clarify?" I kept my voice even, explaining the liability clause I'd flagged, emphasizing its role in protecting both sides. She thanked me. Her words clipped and hung up. Minutes later, the conference room door stayed closed, but I could hear raised voices. Sadie's faltering and Gregory's tense. Jocelyn slipped by my desk, her eyes wide. "The client's delaying the signing," she whispered, pretending to adjust a file. "They're questioning Sadie's prep." I nodded, my face neutral, but inside I felt a spark of vindication. My work, my years of instinct had spoken louder than Sadie's buzzwords. Nathan caught my eye from across the room, his expression a mix of relief and nerves. He mouthed, "Good call," and turned back to his screen like he didn't want to jinx it. Miles, though, was pacing near the coffee machine, his phone glued to his ear, his earlier swagger gone. I overheard him mutter, "She didn't know about the clause." His voice was tight, like he was scrambling to distance himself. I stayed at my desk, sorting papers. My hands steady, but my mind racing. This wasn't triumph yet. Just a crack in Sadie's facade, one I'd made without raising my voice. But the weight of it settled on me. What would Gregory do when he realized I'd flagged the issue? Would he see it as loyalty to the deal or a betrayal of his niece? I pushed the thought down, focusing on the client's trust, the one thing I'd always held sacred. Still, the silence from the conference room grew heavier, like a storm cloud waiting to break, and I knew the fallout was coming. The conference room door finally opened, and Sadie walked out, her face flushed, her smile gone. She didn't look at me, just strode to her desk, her heels clicking sharper than usual. Gregory followed, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me. He paused, then called my name, his voice low. "Harper, a word." My stomach dropped, but I stood smoothing my blouse and followed him to his office. The space felt smaller now, the leather chairs cold under my hands. He didn't sit, just leaned against his desk. "The client's holding off," he said, his tone clipped. "They're hung up on your flagged clauses." "Care to explain?" I kept my voice steady, explaining the need for clarity, how the clauses protected us. He nodded, but his eyes were hard, like I'd crossed a line he hadn't drawn yet. Back in the open office, the air was thick. Miles avoided me, his phone now silent, his earlier bravado replaced by nervous glances at Sadie. Nathan stepped up during a follow-up call, presenting data I'd prepped months ago, his voice calm but firm. The client thanked him, and I caught a flicker of pride in his eyes, like he was carrying my torch. But Sadie's desk was a storm cloud. She was typing furiously, her lips pressed thin as if she could will the deal back on track. I sat quietly sorting emails, but I felt the shift. My move had exposed her, and the room knew it. At home, Ethan was waiting, his face softer than it had been in weeks. "Heard from Jocelyn," he said, handing me a glass of water. "Sounds like you shook things up." I nodded, but the victory felt hollow. "I didn't want to hurt the deal," I said, my voice low. "I just wanted them to see." He pulled me close, his arms steady, and for a moment I let myself lean into him. But Layla's door stayed closed, her music a faint hum, and I wondered if she'd ever see me as more than the mom who chose work. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come. I stared at the ceiling, the day replaying in fragments, Gregory's cold stare, Sadie's faltering pitch, Nathan's quiet loyalty. I'd taken a stand, but at what cost? The deal was teetering, my legacy tangled in its fate. I'd wanted to protect what I'd built, but now I wasn't sure if I'd saved it or broken it. The thought settled like a stone in my chest, heavy and unyielding, and I lay there waiting for the morning to decide what came next. My last day at the office arrived quietly, like the hush before dawn. I walked in at 7 a.m., the building still half asleep, and stood in my office doorway, taking it in. The space felt different now, less like a battlefield and more like a chapter closing. I started packing, slow and deliberate, folding old project folders into a cardboard box. Each one held a memory, a late-night brainstorm, a hard-won contract, a team laugh that carried me through. I ran my fingers over a faded sticky note from a colleague long gone, thanking me for staying late to fix a crisis. It made me smile, soft and real. I sat at my desk, the chair creaking under me, and pulled out a small leather journal I'd kept in a drawer. It was where I'd jotted ideas over the years, little sparks of strategy that became deals. I flipped through it, the pages worn but warm, like a letter to my younger self. I wasn't angry anymore. Sadie's stumble, Gregory's silence, it didn't erase what I'd built. I'd spent 28 years shaping this place, and that couldn't be taken away, not by anyone. Layla texted me mid-morning a simple, "You okay with a photo of her at a coffee shop?" Her college application stacked beside her latte. I typed back, "Better than I thought." We'd talked more these past few days, small moments that felt like rebuilding a bridge. Last night she'd shown me her essay draft, her words raw and honest about growing up with a mom who was always half gone. I'd listened, really listened, and promised to show up for her college tour next month. Her smile had been small but genuine, and it stayed with me now, warming the edges of this strange final day. Jocelyn popped in carrying a thermos of tea. "Thought you'd need this," she said, setting it down. Her eyes were soft, like she knew this was goodbye. We didn't talk about the deal, or Sadie just shared a quiet moment about the time we'd snuck cupcakes into a board meeting years ago, laughing until we cried. It felt like a gift, that memory, a reminder of the good I'd woven into this place. As she left, I looked around my office, the box half packed, and felt a stillness settle in, like I was finally ready to let go. By noon, the office started to hum with its usual rhythm, but I stayed in my quiet bubble, packing the last of my things. I found a small, tarnished paperweight, a gift from a client after my first big deal. It was heavy in my hand, grounding like it held the weight of all I'd carried here. I slipped it into my box, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that my work had mattered, even if the company forgot. I wasn't erasing myself, I was choosing what to carry forward. Ethan showed up unexpectedly, leaning against the doorframe, his work boots still dusty. "Thought I'd help you finish up," he said, his voice low, warm. We packed side by side, mostly in silence, but his presence felt like a steady hand on my back. He held up an old team roster, chuckling at the bad haircuts. "You built something real here, Harper," he said, and I nodded, my throat tight. For the first time, I believed it wasn't just about the deal. The team gathered for a quiet lunch in the break room, Jocelyn's idea. Nathan brought sandwiches, his shy smile breaking through as he recounted a time I'd stayed late to help him debug a report. Miles joined, quieter now, his eyes flickering with something like regret. "You made us better," he said. Almost too soft to hear. I didn't need his apology, it was enough that he saw me. We ate, laughed, and for a moment the weight of the past week lifted like sunlight through a cracked window. Before leaving, I wrote a letter to Gregory, my pen steady on the page. I thanked him for the years, the chances he'd given me, nothing more. No accusations, no bitterness, just closure. I sealed it and left it on his desk, my final act of grace. As I walked out the office, lights dimming behind me, I paused at the door, my hand on the frame. The world outside was waiting, and for the first time in years, I felt ready to meet it, my heart quiet but whole. The weeks after I left the company felt like stepping into a new skin. I woke early each morning, not to rush to an office, but to sit on my porch with a mug of tea, watching the neighborhood stir. The quiet was unfamiliar, almost heavy at first, but I started to lean into it. I'd walk to the corner bakery, order a scone, and chat with the owner, June, about her grandkids or the weather. These small rituals, so simple, felt like reclaiming time I'd given away for years. I wasn't running anymore. I started a consulting business, small and deliberate, taking on clients who valued my experience. My first project was with a startup, a scrappy team of young engineers who reminded me of my early days. I met them in a cramped co-working space, guiding them through a pitch deck, my voice steady, as I shared lessons I'd learned the hard way. They listened, eyes wide, and one of them, a quiet coder named Zoe, thanked me after saying I made her feel like she could do this. I drove home that day, my chest lighter, like I'd found a piece of purpose I hadn't known I'd lost. Layla and I grew closer too. We spent a weekend visiting a college campus in Virginia, walking through leafy paths as she talked about her dreams of studying environmental science. I listened, really listened, asking questions instead of checking my phone. At night, we'd sit on the hotel balcony sharing fries and stories, her laughter easing a knot I'd carried for years. Ethan joined us for the drive back, his hand resting on mine as we navigated quiet highways. He'd started cooking dinner most nights, simple meals that filled the house with warmth, and I found myself looking forward to those evenings, the three of us together, no deadlines pulling me away. I kept a small wooden box on my desk at home, filled with mementos from my career, a client, thank you note, a worn-out pen from my first deal, a ticket stub from a team retreat. I'd open it sometimes, not to dwell but to remember. I wasn't the woman who'd let work define her anymore. I'd fought for my worth, not with shouts, but with quiet choices that said I was enough. The company moved on the deal, limping forward under new hands, but I was building something new, something mine, and it felt like enough. One afternoon, I drove to a nearby park, a place I'd passed 1,000 times but never stopped. I sat on a bench watching kids chase each other across the grass, their laughter sharp and free. I pulled my jacket tighter, the fall air crisp, and thought about the woman I'd been a month ago, frantic, tethered to a desk, chasing approval I'd never fully get. I wasn't her anymore. The hurt from Sadie's takeover, Gregory's silence, even Layla's sharp words, they'd carved something open in me, but not to break me. They'd made space for something new. I realized I didn't need the company's validation to know my worth. It wasn't in the deals I'd closed or the title I'd held. It was in the choices I made now, showing up for Layla, guiding those young engineers sitting here present in this ordinary moment. I thought about forgiveness, not the loud kind, but the quiet sort that lets you move on. I didn't hate Sadie or Gregory. They'd made their choices, just as I'd made mine. I'd spent years tying my value to their world, but now I saw it clearly. My strength was in how I rebuilt, how I chose myself without needing to prove it to anyone. That was the lesson, hard-won and simple. You don't have to win every fight to know you're enough. You just have to keep walking, head up, heart steady, toward what matters. I stood brushing leaves off my jeans and felt lighter, like I'd set down a load I'd carried too long. Back home, I hung a small painting Layla made years ago, a messy, bright landscape on my study wall. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and it reminded me to keep building, keep choosing, keep showing up. That was my legacy now, not a contract or a corner office, but a life I was finally living on my terms. What moment made you realize your own worth? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story. If this resonated, hit like, subscribe, and maybe share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to finding our strength, one quiet step at a time.